Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you to our March uh, Ecosystem Science and Management webinar. This is a series that we have a webinar each month during the lunchtime hour. The webinars usually last about 55 minutes, and then we give you time to do a couple of the paperworks, whether you've signed up for CEUs or you have been here to gain the knowledge for free. As Pete said, I'm on the campus of Texas A&M University, and yet I serve in the same capacity as the other extension range specialists do across the state. With plant identification tips, this for this webinar, I wanted to highlight one family, the Euphorbiaceae, or what is commonly known as the Spurge family. When I went and I asked one of the members of the Texas A&M Best in America Plant Identification Team that got second at our International Society for Range Management contest back at the beginning of the month. I asked one of the students, if you had to give somebody a tip about plant identification, what would you want to tell them? And the individual told me you start at the top of the plant. And ladies and gentlemen, a lot of times that's where the flowers are. Except even within the Spurge family, we have exceptions to that. The Urticaceae, the nettles that we have from Europe, are a good example that the flowers are down in the stem. When I think about plant identification, and I relate that to taxonomy, the naming of organisms. In plants, everything is done scientifically in our terminology and in how we line plants up that are related. It's all done with the flower. So that when I look at a sunflower, one of the families I talked about last year, we're looking at how many eggs are in the ovary, what supports the ovary, does the plant have petals? Well, that terminology that you get from the rose family and the sunflower family, they just don't work very good in the Spurge family. Out of the 154 families of plants that we have in Texas, a lot of those families have different terminology, and so people who study plant identification and plant naming, they have to go through and learn a lot of terminology to be able to talk about things and look at it. So let's begin with kind of a broad description of the Euphorbiaceae. If you notice in my first statement, the family does occur worldwide. It's a family of 313 genera with a huge number of species. The latest records show about 8,100 species that are in the Euphorbiaceae. In Texas, and this is going to be plus or minus a few plants or even genera, depending upon what resource book that you have that you like the best. We have around 138 species and 20 genera, with 133 of these species recognized as native plants, meaning they were here at the beginning of settlement and were found along the way as our early naturalists and others discovered plants. And then we have 5 major spurges that are introduced plants, and a couple of those we will deal with today. Well, you can see with 138 species, and I have roughly 55 minutes, I'm not going to cover every one of the plants, but I am going to go through important genera and talk about some species as representatives of that genera. You'll find in a lot of books that some authors talk about this family as being poisonous. Well, I'll remind you that some are, but you also have to look at when that word poisonous or toxic is used, who is it poisonous to? Because when we think about a very common annual weed in Texas that we will call one seed croton, we'll call it prairie tea, over here around College Station, we have woolly croton. The croton oil, is it toxic, or is it something that we know the Indians used it as a laxative? They also used it as a purgative. And so if you have something that relaxes you or something that gets rid of everything in your digestive tract, does that mean it's poisonous? And we have a lot of chemicals on the market that are for sale today that the chemical will do something to aid a human. So a lot of times, because we are an agricultural state and livestock management has been very important, a lot of books, when they use the term poisonous, they're referring to livestock. They're not referring to the wildlife or to the humans that live here. So I'll caution you on using the word poisonous until you identify what organism a plant or the chemicals in the plant may be poisonous to. As we look at the family is made up of forbs or herbaceous plants, and then we do have trees and shrubs. The trees in this family, except for one exception, are fairly small, and in my mind would barely make the definition of being a tree. But it is a diverse family. When I look at this screen, I'm going to see 10 of the 20 genera, starting with Acalypha and going down to Euphorbia here. These genera, when I look at them, this Acalypha, every genus has a common name. So the members, the 10 species that are in this genus, they're referred to as the copperleaf group. And then when I get down to the bottom of the list and I look at the genus Euphorbia, the largest number of species in a genus within the Euphorbiaceae, we have 63 species. But everything in that genus is referred to as a spurge. Now, these genera names they may or not be used when I go to look up the common name or one of the common names of a plant. So this second screen on this is showing you, starting with the genus Geotropha, and we have 3 species of Geotropha in Texas, and these 3 species are all poisonous to humans, because one of the characteristics of this family is that many of the plants can contain a white fluid or a clear fluid. A lot of times people will pick a spurge, and because white milk comes out of it, they think it's a milkweed. But 5 different families of plants in Texas have a white milky sap. In this family, we have white milk and then we have clear milk. So not every member of the family is going to have a white sap in it. When I go down to the bottom and I see the genus Tragia, 10 species, all of those are referred to in our common names as nose burns of one kind or another. So when you think about the names of these groups or the names of the individual species, they often reflect what the person who first named them saw. And so if they saw the plant when it was young and not flowering, they may have given it one common name, and then when the plant went to flower, because of the beauty or the smell of the flower or other things that I can visually detect, I might get a name from that. So most of these plants, when I go through the literature, and a lot of these occur in other states or even into Mexico and Canada, they have a lot of common names. Well, which common name is correct? The thing that we try to do is we learn the common name of a plant that is used in the area where we live, because the name becomes the means of communication. So look, here's my first question for you. And Pete has fixed up a box there on the left. And the question is about a common spurge that it has great color and beauty. We use it at Christmas time. It's sold at Christmas as an ornamental for the Christmas and the holidays that occur, what would be your number one guess at what the plant is? So if you go ahead and type an answer into that box, um, I'm going to show you that within the Euphorbiaceae and the Spurge family, you're already going to know a lot of the plants, but you may not have recognized them as being members of this family. So Pete, we've got 15, 16 answers. When we get up to, we've got 60 participants, and I know for some of you, it may be a husband and wife or boyfriend and girlfriend listening together, and we appreciate that. And so when I get up there, Pete, around 40, I'll go ahead and start talking about it again, but I'll give them a few moments to get their answer in. Now, it's good that you can't see all the answers because some of you have it exactly right. Some of you are just making wild guesses.
Okay, whenever you move on, you want me to close the question, or you want me to leave the answers open for a while?
No, you can go ahead and close the question. There are 61 participants at the moment, and 27 have responded. I think that's a good number, and the number may actually continue to go up, Pete.
Yes, good number. I see most of them got it right.
Yeah, most of them got it right. Okay, if you'll clear that off of my screen, I will progress on to the next slide. Thank you for those that participated in that. Thank you, because most of you got it right. The correct answer is the poinsettia. And so the poinsettia is a commercially important plant species. It is a native of Mexico, but the predominant number of plants today that are raised that we get for sale are not only grown in greenhouses in Texas, but a lot of what we see on the market is grown in Hawaii and out in California. So this plant is particularly well known for its red and green foliage, widely used at Christmas and floral displays. And note that the common name of the plant is actually named after a person, not named after something the plant had in its features that made something come into the mind of man to name it. But Joel Roberts Poinsett, the first United States minister to Mexico, this plant is named after him, and he brought the plant back to the United States in 1825, and then it's been going along. So look at the colors on these two pictures that are commercially for sale, and and know that we have about 100 varieties with different color patterns, different shades, different sizes. Some of the poinsettias will get over 5 feet tall. The ones that we like to buy around Christmas time are going to be anywhere from 10 to 24 inches tall. When I see this color, note that the color is not the flowers. The flowers of the poinsettia are very small and they're not showy. So when I look in the center of the poinsettia, these three groupings that I see here and up here and these red leaf-like bracts, those are actually the flowers. So all the colors that I'm looking at are not the flowers, but they are a leaf, an upper leaf that we'll call a leaf bract. And so the number one thing I learned about the Euphorbiaceae is that none of the members of this family have petals. The flowers do not require petals, so in the life of the plant, they're not required to call in a pollinator or to call in an insect that might eat the petal but pollinate the plant at the same time. So when I look down here, look at the variation in the white to pink to our dark pinks and into the various shades of red that we have. Makes it a very attractive plant that man has been using. When I do pull the leaf or I break the stem of this plant open, there is a white, milky, acrid juice. And if I get that juice on my finger and later I stick my finger in my eye, the reaction of my eye is that it will close, and there's no amount of murine or visine or any other chemical that can be used to open the eye back up. So we want to be careful with these members of this family, especially those that have a white milky sap. Now, let's think about in plant systematics in the taxonomy of the 5th largest family of plants in the state of Texas. I'm going to have a lot of new names, and if I get into the book, commonly these names are used. But look, here is the top of the plant of this spurge, and this is Euphorbia Colorada, and the flowers are at the top. So look at this sheet from Radford and Dixon and Massey, printed in 1974, that goes through the general plant parts of one genus, the genus Euphorbia. But there are a lot of other plants that don't have everything that you see on this screen about the Euphorbiaceae. But Radford, if you ever found that book at a half-price bookstore, this would be a good book to get on the vascular plant systematics. Goes through a lot of families. So the upper part of the plant of a small plant, many times, like I see on this diagram, the flowers are up there. They come out at the top to position themselves for pollinators or for the wind, for pollen. And as I go down the stem, most of the Euphorbiaceae are going to have alternate leaves, meaning like here, I have a leaf on the left, I have a leaf on the right, a leaf on the left, a leaf on the right. We call that leafing pattern alternate. If the leaves were exactly equal on the stem and I had a leaf here opposite this leaf, then that would be termed opposite. If I had a group of leaves that it took 3, one on the left, one on the top, and then one on the back right, to go in a full circle around the stem, then I would call that whorled. So in the Euphorbiaceae, we basically have alternate leaf pattern with some exceptions with an opposite leaf pattern. So looking at that diagram a little bit closer, in the Euphorbia genus, the spurge, the mat spurges and others, notice that a particular part of the plant that I'm going to find is there's a flowering nectary gland up next to where there is a big cup here supporting the male parts of the flowers that come out of this involucre cup, and these are the stamen that have the pollen in them. Notice that I have a columella, a shaft that comes out and sticks the female flower here in the top left out at an angle. And so when I look at this, the female flower, the family is also often looked at as having unisexual flowers, meaning that the male flowers are separated from the female. When I get into the Euphorbiaceae, the family, it can even go as far as some plants are male plants and support male flowers. Some are female plants and support female flowers. Here in the genus Euphorbia, the same area is going to have both flowers, but the male and female have been separated. Where could that be important in ecology or in pollination ecology? If my male flowers are up above the female, then self-pollination can occur. If I remove the female flower away from the male flowers, then a lot of times that will support an increased amount of cross-pollination. And as plants adapt through time, we're depending upon cross-pollination to lead to a plant's genetic pool that will help it adapt to change over time. So a good starting point on that flower chart right there. Now, if I come into the plant down in what is called the Sciatium and the involucre cup, and I peel the wall away, then I can see the non-mature pollen sacs that are down here that are supported by an anther. and ultimately, as they mature and become adult pollen sacs, then they're exerted above the involucral cup. And so this is important to recognize in this group. The male flowers themselves are supported by um, a pedestal, and then up here on the top, I do have the sacs that have the pollen in them. In this family, the male flowers are called staminate flowers. The female flowers are called pistillate flowers because they will have the pistil. So here, a nearly mature schizocarp, when I look at this, is the fruit of most of the family. And most of the family is going to have a female flower that is going to have 3 of these locules that produce 1 seed inside the locule. So the fruit in this group is called the schizocarp, but more commonly we'll call it a capsule. And within each locule there will be 1 seed. So this flower, female flower, is producing 3 seeds. Now notice there's often a persistent amount of the stamen material that will stay up on top of the capsule. When the capsule parts break open and that 1 seed is dihyst or put out into the environment, you'll see a splitting of the 2 sides of the capsule where that 1 seed is. And a lot of times when I'm looking at the plant and I see the flowers, I can also look at flowers that have already matured and already dihyst their seeds, and I'll see the open parts of the schizocarp here, and showing me that the seed has already gone out. When I look at the center of the female flower, where these 3 parts of the capsule attach on each side, this central area of this fruit, a capsule, is called the columella. And all the parts, the stigmas are still here at the top, but I have this central shaft going down to this connection point. So this is what gives it persistence, and often I can find this part of the flower throughout the rest of the year, as it will be persistent. The seed vary in size from the very tiny seed of many members of the Euphorbia genus all the way to the largest seed that we have here in Texas in bull nettle. And bull nettle, the seeds were so large that actually early settlers ate the seed because they had a chestnut type flavor. So many birds that are seed-eating birds out on our rangeland and prairies, they're going to be eating the seed of this kind of plant as it falls on the ground. So here is the whole thing put back together. I've got the basal part showing the only colorful part of the flower, which is the nectar glands, and then I have my upper perianth with my columella and the 3 locules supporting the female flower, and then the stamen up here that will collect pollen out of the air. So in this group, the pollen is produced with the male anthers that are down here, and then pollen to fertilize the ovary is collected up here on this stigmatic material. And again, all these examples have been members of the genus Euphorbia. And this is a top view that I have here, looking down inside the cup, and these glands, the gland can also have a petaloid appendage that we're going to see in many species. But the stamen are down inside the cup. The staminate flower is exuded out here, with the pistillate flowers being down below. And so that helps ensure cross-pollination. And here is just another example. The nectary gland is closer to the center of the cup, and then I have a colorful, can be white or red or various colors, what's called the petaloid appendage that sticks out from that gland. And that is usually there to attract a pollinator. So look, here's question number 2 for you to fill out the box again. Here's a plant that no one seems to like, and looking at this white flower, and and looking at all this hairy hypodermic needles running up and down the stem. Matter of fact, the leaves even have this same spine or a hair on them that's hollow that has a toxin in it. Go ahead and put your name down on it. And again, depending on how you look at this plant, you're going to give it a various name. And some of you are even going to spell it different. People have a tendency to spell things by how they say it. And then I'll give you a few minutes. Pete, we've got 10 answers on this question. We have 66 participants in the webinar. As many of you as you can, if you go ahead and name this plant. And notice whether you get this plant right or not does not determine if you get your certificate at the end of the program. But I would suspect that master gardeners, master naturalists, and other rangeland ecologists are all going to get this plant's name correct. And again, in the picture, I'm not showing the three-lobed fruit that produces a very large seed that turkey ate or that man consumed, even as a kind of a nut-like, even though this is in the Spurge family and not truly a nut. But they ate it, and there was no poisoning or ill effect of the humans who ate those seeds out of the capsule. So Pete, we'll let 3 more people put their answer in. That'll get half of the group. And some of you, most of you, 90% have got the name correct. And even if I break the leaves and the stems off of this plant, I will find the white, milky, acrid juice. But again, it's not a member of the milkweed family. And so, Pete, let's continue and go ahead and clear that, and I'll show you the answer. Here's a herbarium specimen that was in the Lundell herbarium, but notice Nodoscelus texanus is the scientific name located down here on the herbarium label. Now, what do we do with that plant? The common name up here, Texas bull nettle. Some people just called it bull nettle. Some called it nettle. Some of you spelled it Neddle instead of with T's. And in West Texas and down along the border of the sands that go into Mexico, a lot of people call it mala mujer, meaning that it's a bad woman. If I get too close to it and I get on these spines or hollow tubes, they have an irritant in them that will cause me to have a dermatitis effect. So a lot of people, because of that, say it's a bad plant, but actually it's a common member of the native flora of Texas, living in Mexico all the way to Canada on various soils. And a lot of times in Texas, we find it on the more sandy soils. But bull nettle. So good job, ladies and gentlemen. You've already named 2 of the plants. So at this time, Pete, we want to look and see if anybody has a question. And I noticed that Janet and Gary Ellis are letting us know that they're members of a chapter within the Texas Master Naturalists. So does anybody have a quick question over what we've done? Susan, I'll take your question, and then after yours, we'll keep going a ways, and then with Pete's help, we'll look back and get some other questions along the way. So Pete, I know they have questions. We'll wait for them to show up in the chat box as we go along. And so we'll continue with our plant identification tips of the Euphorbiaceae, or the Spurge family. Many of the members of this family are kind of unique looking. Here is a plant that grows on the western edge of the Trans-Pecos and out into the Trans-Pecos and into Mexico and a little bit into New Mexico. Look, these are round stems, but you do not see a single leaf on the plant. This plant was even important in World War II as people tried to grow Candelia, the wax plant, as a source of wax that could be a petroleum substitute. But that work really never panned out. But we do have a lot of knowledge about the plant because the United States Army and our armed forces did look at it as a emergency potential of a hydrocarbon that could be used for fuel. So the plant is native in Texas. It is a perennial, meaning it lives for many years, and it does stay green in both the cool time of the year, the fall, winter, and the spring, and it is green during the spring, summer, and fall. But the leaves and then the flowering are all going to be in the warm season of the year. So the scientific name, Euphorbia Anti-Syphilitica, why would it have had that? Because in traditional folklore medicine in Texas and in Mexico, the plant was used to treat a venereal disease. And from the name, you can see that it was syphilis. Today, we don't recommend people to go out and harvest it. It's still best to go to the doctor and go to the pharmacy and get a true and tried drug that science has shown that's going to work. But an interesting member of the genus Euphorbia. Now, for your third plant, look at this palmate leaf, meaning all the leaflets here are united and they attach at the center. But this is out in your garden, and this plant, what would you name it? We would like for you to put a name in Pete's list because, again, it's a common member of the Euphorbiaceae that has been used commercially at one time or another. Who knows the name of it? And notice I'm asking you to identify a plant based on the leaf shape and not because it has the taxonomic parts of the flower that would be there. Generally, people who are dealing with plants, they're going to have to identify them every single day of the year, and flowers are not always there. I think a lot of times our watercolor and wildflower books can mislead us because we think that the only time we can identify a plant is when the flowers are present. Well, that's not true. And so a lot of times, if somebody had become poisoned by eating this plant at a daycare center or a park or a yard, and you didn't have flowers on it, would you just throw up your hands and give up? So many times the leaves, the stems, the root system, if it has stolons, if it has rhizomes, if it's producing a tall flowering stem, those things can help us in the identification of a plant throughout the life of that plant and not when it's just in flower. But plants like this, would you like to find those in a book, or are you buying books that have a lot of color in them? And being wildflower enthusiasts, if the color's not there, then this plant could be classified as a weed. A weed, a plant whose virtue has yet to be discovered. And when I think about it, no plant in the state of Texas is named weed. There's always something else associated with that. So, Pete, we've got 20 answers to the question. People can still continue, but let's go ahead and go to the next slide if you'll remove it. On this plant, we've got from rhubarb to all kinds of names, including Aurelia and Azalea. But let's look at the plant and look at it when it's in flower. Look at the beautiful female flowers, the staminate flowers at the top of the plant, and then the pollen or the male flowers are down here at the bottom. So this turns out to be Castor Bean, an introduced plant that we have from Africa that's an ornamental or has had some commercial value historically. But the genus and species is Ricinus communis, and notice this L means that it's a very old identification because that L stands for Linnaeus, one of the early plant taxonomists and phylogeny people that we had. Well, the castor bean has been a source of castor oil, but the seeds have been are noted to be highly poisonous to humans if what? Ingested. If the seed are out here on the plant, then they're not poisonous. It's only classified as poisonous when a human ingests it and it has poisoned the human. So formerly, this plant has been used all over the world as a purgative and even as machine oil because it contains the very famous product castor oil. Did any of you grow up having to take castor oil once a week because out of folklore medicine, it would make you healthier and you would live longer? So here's a plant that we have in the eastern half of Texas, and I want to get out of the Ricinus and the Euphorbia group and turn our attention somewhat to a new genus, the Croton genus, Croton. And when you look at this plant, think in your mind, what is the common name that you would put on it? Because the plant is in full flower. And so as I look at this plant, I find out that it has many names depending upon where you went to school, who taught you how to name plants. Was it grandma and grandpa? Was it somebody in high school, somebody in college? But most notably, the plant that we're looking here, this croton, is called woolly croton, but it's also called doveweed, quail seed, and has a lot of other names. As you look at this picture, you'll see a white layer on the leaves. You'll see hairs up and down the stem. You'll see hairs on all of the flowering parts and even the sepals that subtend the flowering area. This is why the plant gets its name woolly croton, because the plant is partially or fully covered in wool. And when I get a microscope and I look at these hairs, they are a stellate trichome. A trichome, a common kind of hair, but the stellate refers to it being star-shaped. So as I go to look at it when it's in flower, notice in the picture here is a female flower, the staminate flower, and then over here on a different stem, the flowers being separated again and unisexual. Here are the male flowers that produce the pollen. So again, the Euphorbiaceae flowers can be separated across plants, they can be separated on the plant, or they can be separated by a staminodium, a columella that we saw in the genus Euphorbia. So again, increasing cross-pollination. So how big does the woolly croton get? Well, doesn't the weather have something to do with that, and doesn't the genetics of the plant have something to do with it? Even last year, when we got over 67 inches of rain, the woolly croton only attained a height of about 4.5 to 5 feet. So these plants can be genetically set. Now here's one that was taken in the early spring, and it's a dry spring, and so the plant is roughly 12 to 14 inches tall. So again, height is a very poor variable to use in plant identification, as genetics and rainfall provide a range for a plant. They're never the height that's shown in the book. So this plant, the woolly croton, Croton capitatus, it flowers in the spring, predominantly in the months of March, April, May, and June. And why I put that range up there is if it doesn't germinate from seed because of no rain in March, April, or May, the plant, when we finally get rain in early June, this plant will still emerge as a spring flowering, summer flowering plant in the month of June. So there's a lot of variability when I look at the things that make up what a plant is doing. So here,
Doc,
later in, yeah.
yeah, Paul's saying that the mic's cutting in and out, but I'm hearing you good. I'm just kind of curious if the rest of the folks can hear you pretty good.
Okay, well, I moved the mic closer to my mouth. So Pete just let me know if I need to talk quieter. and so Donna has said that she has no problems with hearing me or with the mic. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for any of those that might be having a difficulty. I'm trying not to move, and make anything change here where I'm seated, so that we will keep the same quality of pictures and the voice, the audio at a good rate. But look, here on this woolly croton, known as doveweed, goatweed, quail seed, another name that has been used in Texas is hogwort. And this is toward the end of July, and notice that the seed have already dispersed out of that capsule. So I see a lot of flowers that aborted. They never really went and fully produced a seed. So rainfall can have a lot to do with that and what these annual crotons are doing. Here's an example from San Saba County. Notice all the gray-green in this picture that you see. This is an area that was plowed. Well, one of the common annual weedy species, Croton Monathaginus, that we call prairie tea, because the Indians use the foliage of this plant to make a tea or to even make a poultice. And it's also called one-seed croton, because I told you that most of the family has a three-seeded locule. Well, here's one of those exceptions where the female flower only produces one ovary with one egg in the ovary, and thus one seed is produced. But a lot of people look at it as just being another doveweed, something that they might put importance on for dove and quail and seed-eating sparrows that lived out on the prairie. Again, the plant is native. It's an annual. And I wrote cool season in there, but it is labeled predominantly here as a warm season plant, germinating in the spring, flowering as we go into summer, and then losing its leaves and leaving a red stem as I go into the fall. It is found over most of the state, except in the very top of the high plains in the panhandle. So another important member, the genus Croton, we have 21 species that are recognized. Well, let's move to the hill country and notice the limestone rock that is here. This again is the one-seed croton or the prairie tea, but when I have it come up, it often reflects that at the time of germination, there was not a good grass cover. So look at the thickness of the one-seed croton in this picture. And I'm looking here that back in the back of the picture, I pretty much have a solid stand, where in the foreground, I can see that this is a coastal Bermuda pasture, but at the time of spring, the owner of this property had nailed the grass to the ground. There was very little cover, open, bare soil, and in the ecology of the land of Texas, this prairie tea, one seed croton, its place that it fits is as a weed. And so, and a weed comes up on bare ground. The word weed does not denote that the plant is bad, but denote that it's an opportunistic plant that will come up on bare soils, because Mother Nature abhors a void and will provide plants through the succession and through her bailiwick of recovery tools to cover the land and protect that soil base. So to manage correctly, we would have wanted to see coming into the spring a larger cover, a thicker cover of grass on that site. Another common throughout the state, and there are name changes on Croton texensis. It has been made a variety of Croton linheimeri by some audiences, but being a plant namer myself, this in my own mind is a distinct species. And so the top of the leaf is one color, the bottom of the leaf is another color. Again, look at the warty hairs that accumulate on the female flower where the capsule is being formed. That's pretty common for Texas croton. And again, it's a native and it's an annual, and most of the time labeled as a warm season plant. And the only place that we really haven't found this species is in the piney woods. But again, in your book, you might have to look up Croton linheimeri variety texensis or texana. but another one of the 21 crotons. So if you live in San Antonio and you have a lot of live oak trees and you live up at New Braunfels, if you live at San Marcos, here's an understory of another croton. And this croton is Croton incanus, or in some books, Croton torianus, but it is commonly named the Tory croton or Vara blanca, and it is a native warm season perennial that is found in South Texas up into the Edwards Plateau and again out into West Texas in the Trans-Pecos. Let's take a closer look at the plant, and it is used as an ornamental in some instances, but notice how it's made a very nice shrub. Now, notice in the center here, I can see the white male flowers that are in there. And if I look down here toward the bottom, I can see the female. So again, the male and female flowers are separated even in the Tory croton. So here's a close-up. Notice that here is the 3-locular capsule, and then I have 3 sets of stigmatic material. This is called bifid, or they're split into 2 parts, but there are still 3 individual units of the stigmatic material that is going to be there to collect the pollen. The male on this plant is going to have a various number of stamen, and these usually can be found ranging from 12 to 24 stamen in that male flower. See, look at this one. Just try to count the number of stamen that you see are up in this one, and notice that there are outer stamen and that there are inner stamen as well. But a very valuable perennial, where, like with all of the crotons, the seed that are produced here are excellent food for animals that would eat seed, mainly the birds that we have in all these areas. Here is another croton with a silvery tinge due to all the hair on the leaves, but this is a perennial that's called Grassland Croton, Erba del Gato, or Rubaldo, but it is a native perennial, warm season, and it occurs in the western half of Texas. And the most common name I hear is Grassland Croton for Croton dioicus. So, but common in the limestone and caliche areas out into the Trans-Pecos. A group that I have done a lot of study on. This is taken at the High Bridge on Highway 90 going over the Pecos River. And notice this nice shrub is the genus Venardia, and we have 2 representatives of shrub to small tree in Texas, and this is Bernardia myricifolia. The common name is Southwest Bernardia or myrtle croton, Southwest myrtle croton. It's not a croton though. It's also called the reja de raton, or no, there's another name meaning stem on a stem, palo de tarugo. So it is native in Texas, native in Mexico, uh, and so we have this in the western part and the southern part of the state, but it's a perennial shrub to a small tree. If I were at the field laboratory on the Colorado River that the University of Texas has, then this plant, I would find it as a single stem small tree gaining a height up to about 12 to 15 foot tall. But out in the open and in the more xeric parts of the state of Texas, it is a shrub. Now, look at this species. The other one is Bernardia Abaveda, called the desert myrtle croton. Again, native, warm season perennial, occurring in the Trans-Pecos and the bottom and the western edge of the Edwards Plateau. Notice how gnarled it is, and that stems, because these Bernardias are preferred browsing tissue for white-tailed deer. The leaves are also known to be used as green chop by turkey, and the 3-locular capsule or the 2-locular capsule on the Bernardia Abaveda here are excellent quail and turkey food. Well, let's get into these plants a little bit more. On the Bernardia myricifolia, the first one I showed you, this is the staminate flower. Look at the number of stamen, and I've written here that there's 12 to 18 stamen in the male flowers, but the male and the female flowers are on separate plants. and we will look at a female. Oh, here's the male of the Bernardia Abaveda, and not only are the leaves characteristic because the leaf is obovate, where the widest point on the southwest myrtle croton is in the middle of the leaf. That's the widest point, so the leaf can tell me which myrtle croton I have. But look at the male flowers. Again, here I have only 3 to 8 stamen, and the other one had usually greater. Well, what are we looking at here? These are very small flowers. They're 1 to 2 millimeters across. So how big do you think the pollen is in an anther here? This is the female, the staminate flower of Bernardia myricifolia, and notice the stigmatic material here is called fimbriate, meaning fingers sticking out. But again, there's 1, 2, and 3 units of the stigmatic material, and then underneath again is the 3-locular capsule that's going to have and produce 3 seed. This is the smaller flower of Bernardia Abaveda, and again it only has a 2-chambered capsule, so it does not have the staminodium or the columella inside. So here I'm showing you the 3-seeded capsule of Southwest Bernardia, and then the 2-seeded capsule of Bernardia Abaveda, our more desert adapted species. When I look, this plant, like a lot of the spurges, have unique qualities. This is called the basal laminar gland, and this is a blow up of the gland that's at the base of the leaves up here for both Bernardias. This is what the gland looks like. These are paraffin embedded and stained, just like a histologist does with tissue, but here I've done this with plant material. And so this basal laminar gland, it produces a nectar, and things like the ants that you see here on the leaf picture come and get that. Do you think they would be part of the pollination ecology of the plant? Well, inside the leaf of the plant, look at this section right here, because both of these Bernardias have calcium oxalate crystals called Druce crystals that are embedded in the cells throughout the leaves, the petioles, the flowering parts of the plant. This bottom picture is showing that on the Southwest Bernardia male plant, that even glandular material that produces nectar is associated with the flower itself. So this is a way that the plants get pollinators and other visitors to come that are a part of their ecology. Notice that when I look at a cross section of the leaf, there is a layer of Palisade Parenchyma on the dorsal or top side of the leaf, and then a Palisade Parenchyma on the bottom. Now, do you think that would be characteristic of wetter climate plants or a xeric drier climate? When I look at the other species that's out that we call desert myrtle croton, it only has 1 layer of Palisade Parenchyma, and that's at the dorsal or the top of the leaf right here under the epidermal cells of the plant. So again, I can see differences in species in adaptation to where they grow and why they occur in Texas where they are. Now, the leaf surface of the more wetter climate Bernardia, Southwest Bernardia, look at all the stellate trichomes that are covering the surface of the leaf, where in the bottom picture, this is a branching trichome, not a stellate trichome. Sometimes it only has 1 or 2 prongs coming off of that hair. And so this is Bernardia abaveda, but notice the density in the desert is low and the density in a wetter environment is high, because hairs can be used to make a microclimate. Now, I'm going to be pushing along for just a couple of minutes, so hang in there with me, please. Look at all these green plants down in this dry creek bottom. When I get close to it, I find out that it is Stellingia texana, one of the 3 Queen's Delights or Stellingias that we have here in Texas. This one is common in the hill country, where tracheal Queen's Delight is common at San Angelo going west, and Stellingia sylvatica comes out of Oklahoma into the northern prairies and down into central Texas, but a very valuable group labeled as poisonous to livestock. Now, look at this one here that we call leaf flower. And then the leaf flower, you really can't see the flowers because they kind of look like the leaves, but they are mixed in here. So this Philanthus Polygonoidis, it happens to be in the hill country the #1 preferred forb of our white-tailed deer that graze there. And in here, look down at the bottom, I have Chemise nutans, which occurs predominantly throughout Texas, but if I pull the leaf or break this reddish stem, white milk comes out. And so this group, the chemise, was at one time always combined in with euphorbia. And so that 63 euphorbia, as I told you about, that also includes this group. Some people call them creeping spurges. They call them eyebane. They're in the cracks of your sidewalk. They're out on the playground. But they do have white milk in them, but they're not a milkweed. So look at this plant that I took at the Freeman Ranch outside of San Marcos, a group Acalypha, and this is Austrofolia. Look at the common name on this one, the hop hornbeam croton. And characteristic of it, down here in this line drawing, here are the male flowers that produce the pollen, and they are below the female flowers that are up in the top of the plant. So again, we go to look at the top of the plant. Now, one that we think about a lot in southeast Texas is this plant right here. Can you put a name on it? Well, I have to get closer to the plant. Look at the leaves. And this is Chinese tallow tree, Sapium sebiferum, but notice inside the picture here, I can see the fruit. And again, the fruit is a 3-locular capsule. The key about the fruit here is that when the seeds come out, they have a hair-like material on them that helps them to float up to 2 miles from the mother plant. And here is a scene down in Harris County where the Chinese tallow tree is 30 foot tall, and we've come in with a sepi or like a hydro axe and nailed it to the ground. For every mature tree we killed down to the ground, 1,500 babies came up. And a lot of work. I put this in here because an excellent book on woody plants, including some of the members of this family, is the woody plants of the western Gulf region. Excuse me, and the authors have come out of Stephen F. Austin University, but a very good book to have as a resource. So look, snow on the prairie, snow on the mountain. This is Euphorbia Bicolor on the coastal prairie and the eastern part. Snow on the prairie occurs Snow on the mountain occurs in the hill country up into the rolling plains. But as I look at Euphorbia bicolor, a native annual, these plants were for sale in catalogs from New York City as early as 1936 because people planted these spurges as ornamentals. Again, the white around the flower is a nectar appendage, a petaloid appendage, where the white in the leaf-looking material, again, is the bract. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you got to see great diversity that occurs in a family called the Euphorbiaceae. And I'll go back and look at a couple of questions, Pete, but this brings to conclusion the amount of material that I wanted to offer today. We want to thank you for being a part of our March webinar. And again, look at this very famous saying that somebody made up. If you can't name it, you cannot see it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being a part of a naming program.
Thank you, Doc. Really good. So we'll kind of hang around and see if any questions come up. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna go ahead and hopefully this web link will pop up on your browser. Please answer the survey. If not, I'll type it here. Just go ahead and type on this survey question. and we appreciate all your answers. Are anonymous. And with that, as we wait for answer for more questions, let me say that our next session will be April the 7th, native versus introduction to costs and benefits. And we're going to talk about if you're going to plant in some new fields, whether you need to go natives or introduce. And the speaker will be Dr. Megan Clayton and Matt Young. I forgot his name. Again, if you're not following us on Facebook, we have a website or fan page on Facebook. You can find us at facebook.com/txrange. If you're not on a mailing list, let me know. Type in your name or go to our natural resource website and add yourself to our mailing list. That way you can get timely information about this webinar.
Pete,
Yes,
they
sir.
can even in the chat box, if there's a family of plants that they'd like to hear about in the future, they might put that as a note to you in the chat box.
Yes. If they wanna put, if they're not on the mailing list and like to get on the mailing list, if they'll type their email addresses on the chat box, I can add them to the mailing list.
Very good.
And Paul says he think it's a web I think it was a web connection, not the mic. So the other thing I'm gonna say is, as we're sitting here waiting on more questions, is we moved over to Adobe Connect. And with Adobe Connect now you can actually listen to us with your Android phone or your iPhone. So there's an app that you can download for your phone. So if you're out plowing or out in the back 40 or somewhere, you can still listen to us with this new software we're using. Okay, doke. Just type in your email address. I'll go ahead and add y'all in. You got normally about the first weekend of the month and last weekend of the month, I'll send out webinar information on the mailing list, so you'll be able to get in that. Going back to the first plant you put out, the Castor Bean, I think it was, or the second plant, there for a while, I was thinking it was okra.
And we had a few individuals that wrote down okra, but I'm going to tell you that is a good sign because they didn't call it a grass or a tree. See, and an okra is with a palmate leaf is another annual plant that's also not native to Texas.
And I think the okra doesn't have near as many points on the leaves.
Probably not. And even the castor bean can be quite variable. Some of them only have 5 points, and then I've seen it up to 9 or 10, depending on the selection and what has been selected for to produce those beautiful red and purple orange flowers that people are selling at the nurseries as an ornamental for the color. Sometimes that has when they select, they're selecting for color, but then they also selected for the number of points on the leaf. They just didn't know it.
I think I have a few folks I'm going to add to the mailing list.
Okay.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording at this point. I don't see any questions coming across.
No, sir.